So, I often start with a question. So I got a question for you today, and I'm going to tell you it's a little deeper question than I usually start with. So, are you ready for it? Here it is. What got you interested in Jesus? What was it? Take just a moment. Think back on it. What was it that got you interested in Jesus the first time you really started to get interested in him? Was it just some curiosity, some idea that there's something greater than me and I just need to kind of start figuring this thing out? Was it a person? Maybe it was a parent or a sibling or a teacher or a pastor or a youth pastor or somebody who said, "Hey, listen, have you explored who Jesus is at all? You need to know Jesus." Or was it some desperation, some desperate cry out there that you're in a place where you're so deep in a hole, you're like, there's got to be help somewhere beyond me. And so you cried out and you began to search for Jesus. What is it that drew you toward Jesus the first time? Because, we've been talking about the wise men, and we spent a good bit of time the last couple of weeks working on their story from Matthew. And what we've discovered is that these wise men went searching for the newborn king. And so we've been using the We Three Kings song and Star of Wonders, today it's Star with Royal Beauty Bright. Star with Royal Beauty Bright. And so I want to pick up with the story of the wise men. It's in Matthew chapter 2. You'll find it on the screen in your sermon notes. Here it is. It starts with verse 9. So remember, Herod called these folks in to find out where the child was born, and then he called in the wise men, had a secret meeting with them, and told them to go and find him and report back to him. And now we pick up with the story. After this interview with Herod, the wise men went their way, and the star that they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasure chest and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And so it's the story of the wise men, and I begin to ask the question, and we were talking about this in our content team as we were preparing for today's message. We said, why is it that the wise men even made the story? Why are they there? Because there's some things about the wise men that we know. We know, number one, of course, they were not Jewish. They were from a foreign country. They were Gentiles, and they didn't worship Yahweh. They didn't worship God at all. And these wise men were probably religious in some way. In fact, they're referred to sometimes as religious pagans. And a pagan, whenever you hear that word, that just means someone who does not believe in God. They don't follow God. They don't have faith in God, our God. And so these were strange men who, for some reason, are in the story of the birth of God. They didn't live in Judah. They weren't looking for the Messiah to come to save them like all of the Jewish people were. That wasn't an expectation for them. They were probably very wise and honored and respected and consulted by kings around the world because of their wisdom. But why are they in the story? Why did God choose to bring them to us in the story? Have you ever wondered that? So I was thinking, what if your 5-year-old daughter or your 9 or 10-year-old grandson picked up one of the wise men, you see him down here in the manger scene, and brought it to you, and they said, "Hey, why are they in the story?" Because you and I know the rest of the story. Here's what we know. We learned today that they weren't even at the manger scene. When the wise men came, they actually came sometime later after Jesus was born. And they met him. Where did it say they met him? In a what? Do you remember? In a house. It wasn't a manger scene. And yet we all include them in the manger scene in our homes. We have about 3 or 4 different manger scenes, and we have all kinds of wise men. I was going to bring a bunch of them to show you today, the different ones, because I love them. And what would you say, dads, if your child came to you and said, "Hey, tell me, why are the wise men there?" I know what you'd say. Go ask your mom, right? That's what most of us would say, because we don't really know the answer either. We're like, I don't know, because it's in the story. I think there's more to it. But because then you got to ask, when you're asking the question of why they're in the Christmas story, then you gotta read on, and you'll see that what happened was when they came to the place where the star stopped, it says they were filled with joy. And so now I need to ask the question, why are they filled with joy? I mean, these people who weren't expecting a Messiah, and now here they are, and they're filled with joy. In fact, I'm going to take it a little deeper, because here's what you'll see. It says, when they saw the star stop over the place, they were filled with joy. And joy is the word for the third Sunday of Advent, which is the focus for today. But in the Greek, it's a word, the word is actually chara, K-H-A-R-A-H. And its meaning is deeper than just what we would think of as joy. In fact, it's the same word, pay attention to this, it's the same word that the angel said to the shepherds in the field when they said that I bring you good news of great joy. This is a big word. I think one of the other translations captures it better. It's actually the King James Version. It says this. It says that they were filled with exceeding great joy. Not just joy, exceeding great joy. You know what to exceed something means? It's to exceed the limit. It's beyond the limit. This is significant. These foreigners are now all of a sudden filled with exceeding great joy. And so my inquisitive mind says, why? Why were they filled with joy? Probably some people could say, oh, because the task is completed. They've done their job. They found the King of the Jews, born King of the Jews. Now we can return to our families. We can go back home and do what we were doing all along before this interruption came. I don't think that was it. I mean, someone who you and I and no one else really would have expected dropped everything they were doing. They picked up the goods that they needed, and they traveled to a foreign country, probably at great expense. They searched for a king that they had no faith in and weren't expecting. And then when they saw him, they were filled with exceedingly great joy. Why is that? Was it curiosity? Or are they in the story on purpose? Did God really have a purpose in including them in the story, and is that purpose for us in some way? I mean, when the angel spoke to those shepherds, the angel said, don't be afraid, I bring you good news of great joy that shall be for all people. And so I'm wondering, could it be that the wise men are in the story to teach us something about our own search for Jesus and what might happen when we truly find him? I wonder if that's why they're in there. So I wanted to share these two thoughts with you. Here's the first one. My path, your path, I think there is some correlation between searching for Jesus and finding exceeding great joy. And so there's a path there. There's a journey there. And so here's where it starts. It starts with having an interest in. I've got some interest in this whole idea of Jesus. And so I therefore began to explore or search for him. And that's probably where some of us started our search for Jesus. You know, usually there's some beginning point, and there's something that has happened. There's something that caught our attention, and all of a sudden we think, you know what, I need to look into this further. Think about the people that were living when Jesus was on the earth. Some of them came to him because they were intellectually intrigued by him. They had this curiosity about him. I mean, what is it about this guy? Why are all these people following this guy? And so they began to follow along and listen and search for him. Some even traveled distances to find him. There were some who probably were drawn to him because of all the miracles that he did, the healings, and maybe the feeding of the 5,000 or the 4,000, and they had heard that, or they saw it, and they're like, this guy, he's got something going on I need to know about. There were some, though, that we know came to him out of an absolute desperate place. My daughter is dying. Can you help? Would you come heal her? Or the woman that came to him, and she was convinced wholeheartedly that if I can just touch his robe, if I can just reach out and touch his robe, he might heal me. I've tried everything else, and nothing has worked. I mean, where do you go when you have nowhere to go? And so people came to Jesus. They began to search for him. They were looking for him, just like these wise men. And for others, it might be this. It might be that you're searching for something significant or meaningful that was missing in our lives. We're like, there's this hole in me, and there's nothing else that I can do or search for that's going to fill it up. There's certainly nothing that I've found so far that's going to give me exceeding great joy. And so there's a reason most of us started searching for him. So where did yours start? Where did your journey start? What made you search for him? What got your attention? And I'll just tell you honestly, for me and for Debbie, what got our attention was having a child. And the idea that, now that we have this baby that we're responsible for, that we don't know what the heck we're doing with and trying to raise, and all of a sudden we realize that we want something more significant for him. And so we started, I guess, a journey towards Jesus that was led by a little child. Does it sound familiar? And so we began to get serious about our faith, and we began to explore. But it wasn't because we needed it. It's because we were convinced he needed it. Isn't that interesting? But here's what I believe with all of my heart, and I've been searching and following and on this journey for a while now. I believe that God will use whatever it takes to get our attention. I believe he'll use everything that happens in our life. People say, well, this tragedy happened to this person and there was just no good in it. Well, no, there was some good in there. Not that God caused it, but that God used it for good to draw me or you closer to him. I mean, that's what he does. And so I was reminded of all of these stories in the Bible of God using what was available to him to get the attention of the people. You remember Isaiah, when Isaiah was in the temple and he was probably searching to some extent. And the Bible tells us that God filled the temple with the train of his robe. Just the tail end of his robe filled the whole temple, and it got Isaiah's attention. I mean, for the shepherds in the field, God sent an angel, and then all of a sudden it says that the sky burst forth with the heavenly host. It was full of angels, thousands upon thousands of angels, and the sky lit up, and it said, "Glory to God in the highest, for on earth is peace and goodwill toward men." God will use all things, whatever it takes to get our attention. I was thinking about Moses, another person in the Bible. You remember the story how God got his attention? What did he use? Somebody remind me, I've forgotten. A burning bush. He did. And it's a great story. It's in Exodus chapter 3. Look what it says here. He uses an angel again. It says this, "There the angel of the Lord appeared to him," Moses, "in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up." Can you imagine seeing that? Like, what in the world is happening? So Moses thought, "I will go over and see this strange sight. Why this bush does not burn up?" When the Lord saw that he had gone over to it to look, God called to him from within the bush, "Moses, Moses." It's like God wanted him to know it was God there. I like the way another translation puts it. This translation says this way. It says that when God saw that he caught Moses' attention with a burning bush that didn't burn up, God called to him from the bush and said, "Moses, Moses." It's like God is trying to let him know, Moses, this is God, and I'm here. I'm right here. I'm right here. God will use everything to get our attention. He got the attention of the wise men with a star. And they started searching for him, and they went to Jerusalem thinking that he was the king of the Jews would be born in Jerusalem. Remember us talking about that? And when the news came to him that he's not here, you know what they could have done? They could have said, "You know what? Well, the star's in this area, so there's somewhere in here. Hey, the news is there's some king of the Jews has been born somewhere in here. You guys go find him. He's your king, not mine." They didn't do that. They could have stopped, and I think this is another reason the wise men are in the story for us, because here's what they could have done. They could have just said, "We'll just settle for close enough," but they weren't willing to do that. And their story is, we're not going to stop searching here because we're close to Jesus. We're going to keep going, and so they went on out and followed the star to Bethlehem. Now, I don't know about you, But for a good bit of my life, I was really satisfied with being close enough to Jesus. Do you know what I mean when I say close enough? It's like I was close enough to him. It was almost like I'm going to keep him at arm's length. I know he's here. I know where he is, and I can see him, and I can, if I need him, I can go get him. But listen, Jesus, I just want you to stay at arm's length. I'm not going to get closer to you, because here's what might happen if I do. If I get closer to you, you might require something of me. You might want something of me. And I'm not willing to give that to you now. And so I just keep Jesus at arm's length. But if I needed him, I could go get him. And I just wonder if you've ever felt that way. I just wonder if you've been where I was at some point and you were satisfied with that, but not the wise men, because they could have gone back home then. They could have, but they didn't. They kept going. And here's one of the royal beauties that God used. It's a royal beauty of God for including the wise men. I like this idea too. It's the idea that the wise men had some understanding that there was going to be a king of the Jews born, but they didn't have full understanding. In fact, their understanding of who this was that was going to be born was probably faulty when they started out on the trip to find the baby king. And so here's what I love about this story too, because what it teaches us is that God can use our faulty understanding to lead us to the truth. My faulty understanding of who he is and how much he loves us. And yet he can use that to draw us to the truth. I mean, I remember one of my friends in ministry, and I was listening to him preach one time, and he was doing an invitation at the end. You know what an invitation is? That's where the pastor invites people to commit their life to Christ at the end of a service. And he was doing that in this service, a really good service, very moving service. And he said something that stood out to me, because here's what he said as he was praying. He said, all right, he says, bow your heads, I want to pray now. He says, if this is you, if you're here, just pray something like this with me. Jesus, I don't understand it all, but as much as I can understand it, I today want to commit my life to you. Would you help me understand it better going forward, and help me to grow in my faith and understanding of you? He said, if that's you, just tell him that. And he'll do it for you. And so I love the idea that God uses our faulty understanding or our lack of understanding, but yet he still will draw us in so that we might experience ultimately the exceeding great joy that these folks felt. You know, so many people are like that. They're like, I just can't understand it, and so therefore there's no reason for me to. I'll just piecemeal together my theology. And I think I like this piece and I like that piece. I don't really like that piece. I don't really think God's like that, but I like this over here. And so they piece it together, and it's faulty. But God will draw them in even with faulty theology or faulty understanding. He'll draw them into the truth. I mean, this is what Paul experienced this when he was in Athens. You remember the story in Acts where he went to Athens, where he is trying to share the good news and invite people into a relationship with Jesus. And he goes there and he sees all of these statues to these gods in Athens, Greece. Some of you probably been there to see some of these statues. And you remember what happened? He ran across one statue. You remember it said to and what? Do anybody remember? Unknown God. It's like, you've got this statue out here, and it's like the catch-all. It's like, okay, if these gods aren't real over here, here's one unknown, so we'll just lump him in with everybody else. And Paul takes that faulty understanding and he uses it to introduce them to God in a beautiful way. Look what he says. It's in Acts chapter 17. It says this, people of Athens, I see that in every way you're very religious. You got some understanding that there's something greater than you, but you don't fully understand it. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, there's a big word, I even found an altar with the inscription to an unknown God. So you're ignorant of the very thing you worship. And this is what I'm going to proclaim to you. Let me tell you who this is, this unknown God. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth. And he does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself, look at this part, gives everyone life and breath and everything else. There's the truth. It's this God that you should worship. It's this God who gives you life and breath and everything else. And so this is who we're searching for. And this is who we should find. But some people let obstacles get in the way. Some people let distractions in the world, and we put it off, and we say, hey, I'll get there one day. I just don't have time right now. Have you lived through 2020? Is there time for this? But here's what I love about it. If we're serious about searching for God, if we'll get serious about that, then we're not going to let anything get in our way. The wise men didn't. They could have just said, okay, we can't find him. Let's just head on back, guys. Pack up your stuff. Let's go. But they didn't let anything get in their way, and they discovered the truth when they found him. So here's the question. Has God been trying to get your attention? Has he been trying to get your attention so that you might search for him? And listen, if you search, you're going to find him. Maybe so. Maybe so. But this search it's got to move. You can't stop at the arm's distance. You can't stop with close enough. You got to go to the next level. And the next level is this: when we move from interest in to worship of. There's a big move that happens then. Because we can have a lot of interest in Jesus and in God, but never truly worship him. I think that's where the three wise men, the three kings, some people say, the wise men were when they started on this journey. There was an interest. But now something happens. Look at Matthew 2. We read it a minute ago. They entered the house and saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasure chest and gave him these gifts. They bowed down and worshiped him. Moses, when he saw the burning bush, you remember what happened? He went from, hey, let me see what this crazy thing is, to, I got to take my shoes off because I'm on holy ground. That's what it says in Exodus. It says, God said, don't come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place you are standing is holy ground. And worship happened there. So this word worship, it's a big word. In the Greek, it's proskuneo. It's pretty close. Whether it's right or not, I don't know, but it sounds good. And here's what it means. It means this. The first thing it means is like to kiss the hand of. You know what I'm talking about? It's like to pay honor to hump. I'm gonna kiss your hand. And so that's kind of the idea of it. The second one is this. It's to bow down, lying prostrate, with the idea of kissing the ground before someone. Now, anybody ever experienced that before? When we were on a mission trip in Uganda, there was a district superintendent, Methodist, local Ugandan, and he said, I would be deeply honored if you Americans would come and go to my house. I would like for you to meet my mother. And we said, we'd love to do that. So he took us to his house. And let me describe to you his house. His house was a wooden hut. If you've ever seen pictures of a wooden hut, it's made out of wood and mud. It's a mud hut, basically. And it's round like this. And it has a thatched roof on it. And when you go in, that's all there is that one room. That's their house. And we went into this house. The mother was in there, and she was wearing the traditional African dress, and just a beautiful, beautiful elderly woman. And we walked in, and we were like, we're just so honored to meet you. It's just an honor to meet you, ma'am. And before we could speak, when she saw us, you know what she did? She hit the ground. She was literally on the ground, on her face, with her hand up like this. And we were just deeply humbled. We were like, what, why are you doing that to us? We said, get up, please, get up off the ground. I mean, that's the idea, that when these three wise men found the Christ child, that's what they did. They bowed low to the ground. And here's the next definition. It's profound reverence and submission to someone. Profound reverence and submission. That's where worship is supposed to be. And sometimes we come to worship and we have a good time and all, but I'm not so sure that we bow down like that in reverence and submission to God Almighty. It's the same word, this word, proskuneo, however you say it. It's the same word that was used when Jesus was walking on the water, coming to the disciples in the storm, you remember? And they were scared, and Peter said, if it's you, Lord, the Lord said, it's I. Do not be afraid. And Peter said, if it's you, then let me come out to you and walk on the water. You remember that story? Do you remember what happened after Peter and Jesus got back in the boat. Watch what the Bible tells us. It's Matthew 14. It says this: when they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. Then the disciples worshiped him. There's that word. And look what they said. You really are the Son of God, they exclaimed. It's like this profound, deep honor and worship, reverence and commitment to him, surrender to him. And so I'm still back on my question. Why the wise men? And why would the wise men do that? Why would they do that? Bow down and worship, as opposed to just saying, we acknowledge you, now let's go home. And so I don't know. I'm just believing that God put this story in the Christmas message for us on purpose. And maybe it's because the wise men bowed down because in him, in Jesus, the Christ child, and all that God did to draw them to this place, the star, everything he used to reveal his son to the wise men, maybe in that somehow they saw that this is significant and there's truth here. I mean, they must have realized that the star of royal beauty bright wasn't in the sky. It was in this child that they had discovered on this journey in a house in Bethlehem. So here's a question. Have you moved? Have we moved from interest in to worship of? Have we made that move? Because I don't think we'll ever be filled with joy, much less exceeding great joy, until we do. Because I know the sad truth, because it's been my sad truth, and maybe it's been yours too. Sometimes when we search, here's what happens. We're unwilling to open our lives to God once we find him. It's we withhold from him our love and our honesty and our past and our pride and our future. It's like, this is what close enough looks like. That's what I'm talking about, is we find him, but we're not going to open our lives up to him. We're not willing to truly love him with our whole hearts. We're not willing to be honest about the deficiencies in our life and the sin in our life. We're not willing to ask for forgiveness for our past, and we certainly are too prideful to ever think about bowing down on the ground, kissing the ground before him. And listen, I'm not being critical, because I promise you, I was there. And there are probably days when I'm still there. That's why it's a search. That's why it's a journey. And that's why we don't let anything get in the way. We search and we go, and we don't settle for close enough. And so I think the wise men are in the story to remind us of that truth in our lives. And the star, if that star could lead them to the Christ child, then that same light, that love, that mercy, that grace, the gift of Jesus Christ, who humbled himself to come down in the form of a baby, that light will draw us to him too. God will use everything under the sun to draw us to a relationship with him. And so I think they're there for a reason. And so, Dad, you don't have to say, go ask your mom anymore. You've got an opportunity to say, let me tell you why they're there. Because young lady, young man, as you grow up, the most important thing you will ever do in your life is to go from interest in to worship of. And that's why they're there. And so I'm grateful that the wise men are at the manger, even though they weren't officially there. But every time we look at them, we remember our own search for him. So here's some next steps for you this week. Here's the first one. I realize, maybe you have today, maybe there's something happening in your life, or maybe there's an intellectual, inquiry or, desire to learn more. Look at the next one. He's been trying to get my attention. The next one, I really want to find him. I think it's time that I do everything I can to try to find this Christ child, Jesus Christ. Or the next one, I will ask Jesus to remove the obstacles that keep me from, or maybe a family member or somebody that you know, that keep them from searching for this truth. And the next one, I will not settle for close enough. Just don't do it. Don't do what I did. Because you know what? You know what I was missing all of that time? I was missing a genuine relationship with the most loving being that has ever would or will be Jesus Christ. And then this is the last one. Maybe you do this. I'm willing to bow before the King of Kings and fully surrender and worship him. And maybe you're that person that preacher was talking to that day when he said, I may not fully understand it, but as best I understand it, I give my life to you. Maybe that's you. Let's pray if we could. Father, thank you for the wise men, that you put them in the story to help us understand that really their story is our story. I mean, we're all on that search. And we want to do what they did. We want to find him and bow down and worship him. And we want to experience, not because we deserve it, but because you graciously give it to us, that exceedingly great joy. So would you help us to search? Father, if there is someone who doesn't understand it all, but knows that you've been trying to get their attention, I just pray that they would today say, Lord, I don't understand it all, but I want to give my life to you as best I understand it. So help me to grow in my faith and search for you even more. So thank you, God, that you love us, that there's nothing under heaven that you would hold back to get our attention so that we might know your love for us. We love you, and we're grateful in Jesus' name.